Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. First item on the work session is a proclamation for National Kids to Park Day. I have Emily Conrad join me, please.
Hi, I'm Alia.
You have some handouts for us.
I do.
Cool.
I just thought I'd take this opportunity to draw everyone's attention to our spring and summer activities guide and our new Parks Fitness Challenge, which will be starting in the month ahead. So,
All right, the proclamation is for National Kids to Park Day on Saturday, May 20th, 2017. Whereas May 20th, 2017 is the 7th annual National Kids to Park Day organized and launched by the National Park Trust. Whereas National Kids to Park Day empowers kids and encourages families to get outdoors and visit America's parks. And whereas it is important that we encourage children to lead a more active lifestyle to combat issues of childhood obesity, diabetes mellitus, and hypertension. And whereas in recognition of National Kids to Park Day, the City of Hagerstown would like to encourage children and adults in Hagerstown to explore their neighborhood parks and discover science, history, nature, and adventure. Now, therefore, we, the Mayor and Council of the City of Hagerstown, Maryland, do hereby proclaim the May 20th, 2017 as National Kids to Park Day and urge all citizens of Hagerstown to make time on this day to take their children and their lives to a neighborhood, state, or national park. Signed by me.
thank you.
Thank you.
Also, thank you. Thank you so much. Also, this Saturday is the beginning of Railroad Heritage Days weekend at Hagerstown City Park from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. And you get a shuttle ride, a wristband between two sites and two parks. That's Ridge Avenue Park and City Park. And also the National Wagon Train will be coming through Hagerstown City Park around 2 p.m. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will. Bond ratings.
Good to see you again. How are you?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Or afternoon. And actually, it is a very good afternoon.
Yes.
Happy to report we're in the midst of our 2017 bond issue, and coincidentally, as part of that process, we talked about the calls that we went through with our rating agencies, and I believe Valerie shared an email about a week and a half ago. And we wanted to take the opportunity to extend an invitation to Lester Guthorn, our financial advisor with Public Advisory Consultants, to just run through what the rating reports mean. And I even though we sent an email, I apologize, I meant to include copies in the packet. So I made additional copies and put at everybody's seat. But before we even get too far along, I guess I want to extend a special thanks to Lester. He's here today because earlier we did our bond sale for both our 2017 tax exempt or our 2017A bond issue, as well as our taxable 2017B. And I'm happy to report we had very, very good interest rates.
Very good.
So, better than we did in 2015.
Cool.
Yes. Yes.
It actually fell from last week to this week. Last week, Washington County sold, which we are financial advisors to as well, and they sold at a rate of 285, and they're rated higher than you are. And this week, you sold at 257. Wow. Which is a substantial, and that's really a market change. I'd love to give, just credit to everybody.
We will give credit.
We'll give you credit.
I'm not going to take any of it. I just, but no, it worked out extremely well. But the rates have been dropping some. but you can't predict where the rates are going to be. It's just really impossible. You can only see what trends are. I mean, we get economic reports and all kinds of reports forecasting what the future holds, and it's been wrong more often than it's been right lately. And lately means last 3 years. It's not something.
Kind of like listening to a weather report.
It's just very difficult. I mean, there are so many factors that impact your interest rate that it's astounding. And usually, as the stock market rises, the bond yields go in the other direction. You just can't predict. So you go when you're ready. And you try not to look backwards because hindsight always seems to be 20/20. And sometime in the future, if markets work in your favor, you can refund those bonds and get some savings. At least you don't preclude your opportunity. But I think I was here to talk to you about the bond ratings, and I think it's been a number of years since we discussed it the last time. And this year, your bond rating didn't change, that you're what we call a AA credit straight, which is a very, very strong credit rating. You're that strong because, candidly, of the way you manage your finances, the way your financial management policies, plans are in place and are very strong. The way you plan for your budgets, for your future, is very strong. The weaknesses for Hagerstown, and please understand that when these rating agencies look at you, they are essentially comparing you to everybody else. It's not only everybody else in the state, it's because that gets to be unfair. What the state of Maryland can do as a AAA rated, as 5 million population, what they can do versus what you can do is different. The same thing is true on a county level. It's the same way Washington County may outperform Montgomery, Howard, all the other AAA counties in the state, and they're only AA1 or AA plus, which is an extremely strong rating. Their issue is the economy, which certainly is yours. And I say issue meaning the rating agencies like wealthier communities by and large, more diverse employment, larger employment. There are just sort of knee-jerk, if you will, criteria that may or may not fit you all the time, but is the general way, because they have national criteria. So one outlier is not going to change necessarily the way they do things. But having said that, the example here is when they look at the city, they look at the county, and two very, very strongly run organizations, not spending more than they can spend, or potentially you may define should spend. They don't get into that subjective, if you will, conversation. What they do get into is, okay, we're watching, let's say property taxes, the biggest generator of income for you. Well, sometimes you have to raise taxes. In your case, the concern that they will look at is your assessable base has changed. It declines. What will it do in the future? Well, can an organization react fast enough to a decline to offset the loss in revenue? Realistically, there's only so much any jurisdiction can cut in expenditures without closing the doors. There's only so much if you were to have a draw on your reserves. It would take you how long to refill them? You are not going to go to a bank and get a short-term loan to find $5 or $10 million. In 2008, when we had the financial crisis, you couldn't go anywhere to borrow the money. It's the whatever's what can happen. And those are the concerns that apply to a city the size of Hagerstown or the state or a county. They are the same concerns. What they're looking towards is that you're planning for it or at least prepared to deal with negative circumstances. They're not judging you on whether you do it today or tomorrow, but they are comparing what they consider the proper criteria is for your size jurisdiction. Just as they pulled out your pension and OPEB obligations, that they're important to meet, and that you are underfunded. Why? Well, they think, okay, to wholly fund it, does that cost you 10 or 15 or 20 cents on the dollar? Sometime today or sometime in the future, perhaps. Well, if the assessments go in the wrong direction, you're having to collect far more taxes in the future than you need now. They're not asking you to correct it today or tomorrow. They're showing it as a concern they have that they share with the bondholders, that they share with you, that they are, relatively speaking, giving you a bond rating that says you're going to do the right thing because you're a AA credit. But here are concerns that any jurisdiction would have, because there's only so much money that you can acquire. And for you, what, public safety is your biggest expenditure? If you're looking at OPEB and pensions, many of your expenditures are funded by each of your enterprise funds. Well, that doesn't only mean that you have to raise property tax, that means you have to raise rates. Are you going to be able to do that all at one time? Would you even think about doing it all at one time? Probably not. So it's a planning piece, and that's where they have been very satisfied with the way you've addressed most of your issues to date. The only outside issues are strength of your assessable base. In point of fact, when the effort that you all are making and the county's making on rebuilding part of downtown is they look at that as a future attraction, if you will, to build up your revenue, your assessable base. So you will get more revenues in at a point of time. Because if you don't develop your business, which is running this government, and the only thing you can do is just tax more onto the people who are here, that's not helpful. So some development of your business plan broadens the reach and lessens your risk. So that's why they look to the economics, if you will, to be so important, because that is the driver of how you can afford and support this business called the City of Hagerstown. And they know it's a service business. They know it for everybody. It's a service business. I once caught myself saying to a group just like this, I said, did you ever think that you undercharge your citizens for the services they receive? That's a pretty scary thing. I probably shouldn't have said it now, but it's one of the constant questions that arise before any organization. It's not suggesting anybody should raise taxes, but it's just the reality of how do you pay for things. And that's really what the bond ratings speak to. Both rating agencies rate you essentially the same. They have different letter marks, AA3 versus a AA. Actually, AA3 is slightly lower than a AA straight. And they've been pretty consistent with that. So that's it, a thumbnail, if you will, how they look at you and how they look at everyone else in this state and the country.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
Any questions for Michelle? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good news, thank you.
Pleasure. It's always better to give you good news.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'd like to hear that, too.
Yes.
Thanks
You
very
wanna
much.
come back at 7 o'clock?
Thank you.
No, I did pleasure work.
All right, next up is the USA Cycling Amateur Road National Championship update with Visit Hagerstown in Washington County, Lauren Metz, Community Events Coordinator Diane Spedden, the president of the Visit Hagerstown in Washington County. Mrs. Spedden, how are you?
Fine, thanks.
Good afternoon. So I'm here with Dan Spedden, the president of Visit Hagerstown, Washington County, just to talk you through a possible downtown event for 2018-2019. And I'm going to pass over to Dan to explain the bid that the CVB was awarded and what that could mean for Hagerstown.
All right.
Didn't we beat out some small city, right, for this?
A relatively unknown destination called San Diego, California. We were the semifinalists with San Diego. USA Cycling is the national governing body for competitive cycling in the United States. It's a member of the U.S. Olympic Committee, and it is recognized by the International Cycling Union as the sole sanctioning body for cycling in the United States. So we're hooking up with the right organization. In June of 2016, the Maryland Sports Commission distributed an invitation to bid to host USA Cycling Amateur Road National Championships in 2018 and 2019. And the bid really got our attention because you get 2 years in a row, which makes it worth all your work. So we formed a local organizing committee, subject matter experts who are involved in competitive cycling, city staff, county staff, state highway administration, and we put together a bid package, and we learned just a few weeks ago that we had been selected as the premier site, and we would in fact host the event in 2018 and 2019. The 2018 dates have been set for July 26th through 29th. And depending on the number of competitors who register, it could grow to 5 days, from 4 days to 5 days. It consists of a time trial, a road race, and a criterium course. A criterium course is a sprint race, and you're accustomed to seeing that downtown every summer. There's a criterium race, and the course we're proposed for Hagerstown is very similar to the course that we have all that experience running. The time trial will be on Route 67 outside of Boonesboro, and the road race will be Clear Spring, Blair's Valley, a very long distance race over beautiful rural roads. The diversity of the race courses, the scenic beauty of the county, cooperative government, our experience with large-scale events made us a preferred destination for this. 800 to 1,000 participants. It's the amateur national championships. Their age range is from 10 to 23 years old, so each competitor will come with a family, and then there'll be sponsors, race officials, spectators, and media, so we're expecting it to be a sellout as far as hotel rooms go. We estimate visitor spending to be between $1 million and $1.4 million based on the numbers, and 2 economic impact studies that USA Cycling did with similar events.
Cool.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we're excited.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
So the criterion course, that'll be the one that's in downtown, what you're saying?
We would follow a very similar path to what Tour of Washington County already does, which goes around the downtown area.
That's fantastic.
On Friday the 16th, the night before the Cultural Trail grand opening, we're going to run that race. And the race officials are coming to see it in action. And we're going to run a practice event out the Clear Spring route, because we've never done that before, and you don't want to put competitors on a route in the national spotlight and have it be a fail. So we're going to troubleshoot that.
Who participates in the trial run on the 16th?
All comers.
Oh, yeah? So you're open to the public, whoever?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
We just need to put some bikes on the road
Sure.
and make sure it works, so.
Cool.
So, yeah, it's a big event, and we've got a whole year to plan it, and then 2 years to benefit from it. So,
Fantastic. Any questions for Dan or
I think it's fabulous. No.
Don?
Have a comment.
Sure.
City of Hagerstown in Washington County have a long history of bicycle racing in this county. As a matter of fact, I pulled out one of my memorabilia here.
Yep.
Tour DuPont.
I got the poster.
In 1992, I can remember that they built stands along Washington Street,
Right.
extensive stands along Washington Street, and there were thousands of people down there watching the bicycle race. And it was an exciting and fun time in Hagerstown. And this is the hat that was sold, and it's kind of nice to be doing it again after 25 years.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Oh, our pleasure.
That's cool.
Maryland Sports Commission is a three-person agency housed within the Maryland Stadium Authority. And we're a member of that. The lead came from them, so that's a good affiliation. The lead for the lacrosse tournament we hosted last fall came from them. And we've already secured grant money from them to help with the budget for the event. So that should, their grant should cover up to about 50% of the cost of presenting this event. So we've got a good partner there.
Cool.
Anything else, Lauren?
No, I think that's all.
Dan, we appreciate what you did on this, competing with San Diego, California.
Yeah, but I'm
With
still
some of
a
its
little-
natural advantages, it's tough.
Yeah.
But Hagerstown, thanks
I'm
in
still a
large
little
part
excited about
because of
that.
you.
Yeah,
Number one.
yes, yes, sir. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, you might as well stay there.
I stay up here.
Catalyst Project 6 update?
I think that flows very nicely into giving you guys an update on Catalyst Project number 6, which is expanded downtown events and programming. So the Catalyst Project number 6 was looking to expand the programming that we offer in the Arts and Entertainment District in downtown Hagerstown. I just wanted to give you a quick update on what we're working towards to make it easier for event organizers to hold their events in downtown. So in 2016, we looked at about 100 individual events happened in the city of Hagerstown. And we're hoping in 2017 that we'll have about 110, 115. So we're looking at a small jump up from individual events of various sizes, including some relatively larger festivals that we're seeing pop up in downtown. So to further aid the viability of these events and to encourage these events to continue to pop up in our Arts and Entertainment District, we've been working on 2 different areas that we think could really benefit organizers. So this is, the first item we've been looking at is updating the events section of the City of Hagerstown website to make sure that information is readily available for event organizers, that we're presenting that to the community so they can easily find information as to what to do when they're in the City of Hagerstown. So we'll be working with the communications team just to give a more vibrant look, a more updated look to the section of the website that deals with events in general and offers tips on how to encourage volunteering in the Arts and Entertainment District and include how you can actually plan an event in the City of Hagerstown. The second one that we are still working on is the actual creation of an events guidebook that we can provide to prospective event organizers to give them an idea of what does it really take to plan an event in the City of Hagerstown, because there's often many more steps than I think many event organizers realize need to be taken care of prior to publicizing an event and putting their foot forward. So what I provided for you is kind of a table of contents of what we've already worked towards in providing the events guidebook, and that is what we're working towards right now. But we wanted to give you a little taste of the variety of topics that we plan on covering within this guidebook to give to event organizers. So that is a quick update on how we're looking to further expand our downtown programming and the next couple action steps we're going to be taking for the rest of 2017.
Any questions for Lauren? Comments?
Good piece of work.
It's great, yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Information overload, you can't give enough of it out there. that's for
It's
sure.
better to have too much than too little.
But I like the idea of
Yeah.
just a centralized guidebook,
Yeah.
so that it'd be consistent for anyone who comes forward, no matter what size their event is, so it's
And it
really
should
wonderful.
help us to encourage more events because it should give us more staff time that we can dedicate to one-on-one help rather than answering a lot of the same questions
Right,
repeatedly
right.
and just having that readily available to anyone.
It's
I do have
wonderful.
one quick
Yeah.
question. With the downtown improvement project,
Yes.
obviously gonna change some things with the streetscape during construction. Is there a
With
thought
like with the
process?
Maryland Theater.
Yeah, like where are we looking to move things around the corner, or is that still a work in progress?
That hasn't been discussed fully at this time. I know there's a lot of considerations we're gonna have to pay with the construction to South Potomac Street, since so many of our events happen on South Potomac
Right.
Street. We haven't entered into a lot of conversations with that, but I anticipate we'll probably have some answers with the coming months when the Maryland Theater truly moves forward in their
Right.
construction
Just a better
phases.
timeframe of
Yes, but it's
showing
something
some
that we've
ground.
taken in consideration, especially with the Wind Down Friday
Sure.
events and things like that, that it's something that we need to factor in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right, preliminary agenda review. Next Tuesday at 7 p.m., we'll have the call to order, the invocation given by Councilmember Munson, pledge the flag, some announcements. We'll talk about the meetings in June 6th, 13th, and June 6th and 13th, our regular sessions work sessions at 4 p.m. June 20th is a regular session at 7 p.m. And there is no meeting on June 27th, because members will be at the MML convention. We'll have appointments to the Historic District Commission, citizen comments, city administrator comments, mayor and council comments. Then we'll adopt the minutes from April 4th, 7th, 11th, 18th, and the 25th. Then move on to consent agenda. Under the Department of Community Economic Development, there will be an application permit, Hagerstown Hopes, water meter vault, water and sewer service lines at 51 to 53 West Washington Street, Huntsberry Brothers Incorporated from Smithsburg for $69,000. If you have any questions on the consent agenda as I move through, please speak up. Under B, Human Resources, we'll have specific stop-loss insurance from HCC in Wakefield, Massachusetts for $212,894. The Administration of Medical Claims, United Healthcare for $298,935. Dental Insurance Administration from UCCI, Hunt Valley, Maryland for $28,076. Employee Assistance Plan for ComPsych for $10,200. Under Planning and Code, high-density mobile file system from Mid-Atlantic Filing Distributors, Kensington, Maryland, for $31,032. And from the Police Department, the purchase of cameras for downtown, cameras, Skyline Technology Solutions, Glen Burnie, Maryland, for $20,417.58. And Industrial Managed Gigabit Ethernet, HGCI Hartford Incorporated, Columbia, Maryland, $15,030. Under utilities, we'll have water and wastewater, mowing contract for various properties, paying contract in Hagerstown, Maryland for $23,008. Under water, we have a pump assembly, Geiger Pump and Equipment, Baltimore, Maryland, for $34,560. Also underwater is Magna Flock Polymer, George S. Coyne Chemical Company Incorporated, Croydon, PA, for $22,968. Any question on any of those? Under unfinished business, we have an approval and ordinance rezoning Old Town Development LLC, 613 West Washington Street. We have an approval and ordinance tax rates beginning July 1, and approval and ordinance for the budget fiscal year 17-18. Under new business, introduction of an ordinance binding interest arbitration. B, approval of resolutions, residential lease agreements for a bunch of properties.
I didn't get a chance to look through all those, but with these lease agreements, do we have any type of verbiage in there, and I apologize for not reading the whole way through it, if we were to dispose of these properties or sell these properties, of language that we would not be tied to these long-term?
Properties have been in the city's control for 50-plus, older than Mike's Spike.
90 years, 80 years, 90 years. Just for the
Barely old.
utilities, I can speak for those. The properties are all situated on larger properties that we own, so subdivide off of that. They were at our facilities, one's at the Edgemont Reservoir, one's at the Brickner plant, so to kind of, it would be tough for us to subdivide those off to sell. But we can, there's language in lease agreements, so we can terminate the lease agreement at 30 days notice at any time to get out of the agreement itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Some are at the pool, one's over at,
5 in the parks.
yeah, Hager Park, one's at,
That's all, thank you.
All right, approval resolution, the community legacy grant application, which will go, which we've already been through, which is great. Approval resolution, strategic demolition grant application. Approval of Maryland Bikeways grant. Approval of pavement preservation contract, C. William Metzner Incorporated, Hagerstown, Maryland, $1,192,000. Pavement markings, Alpha Space Control Company Incorporated, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, not to exceed $115,000. Misprint there. Approval of a union contract for ASME 1540. Approval of wastewater policy amendment for Guidi. I like how that word is, Kathy, I don't like that. Approval of after-school program for Parkside, approval of after-school program, PTJ Dance Group, approval of switchgear replacement, approval of design services for Hazer and Sawyer for E-WIP grant, Baltimore, Maryland, $155,369. Arista Utility Building outsourcing, which we'll talk about tonight, approval of benches and lighting on Public Square, approval of fiscal year 17 allocation of local repayment to the CDBG program. Any questions?
Mayor, could I go back up the top, please?
Mhm.
I see Paul sitting back there, and I'd like to ask a question of the code administration about the filing system. Paul, where are your files presently physically located?
Majority of our files are located on the third floor in City Hall.
They are. They look like they're quite a mess and inaccessible. It seemed to me, as I read this, I'm not opposed to what you're doing, don't get me wrong, but it seemed to me that the logical solution, the volume of files that you have would be just simply to go to computer and put those files on computers and pull them out. Has there been any talk or thought about that?
We have thought about it. It's the time to get that. We have put inquiries out to try to get students to do this for an internship. I got the ability to sign off on student service learning hours so we can get high school kids to come in here to get signed off. We just don't get any hits on people really wanting to do that as part of their community service projects.
And those files go back.
Most of the files go back to the 1980s.
Yeah, the time to scan each one of
Sure.
those would be really momentous, for regular staff duties, yeah.
In all fairness, I think the city ought to take a serious look at going in that direction in the future. It might take a few years to accumulate some money to do it, but it's,
We do have some thoughts about future, but we have all this existing.
That here and now gets you every time, doesn't it?
Is there any reason it doesn't appear there's any competitive bidding? I mean, I understand Fairfax County took their bid, but
We were looking for any state contract that we could get onto at a cheaper rate. It was actually, we got a pretty good discount going through a state contract rather than trying to get a bid source.
Is that it?
I have a question, not associated with this item. The introduction of an ordinance for binding interest arbitration. So it looks like we're going to introduce the ordinance at the regular meeting.
Yeah, that's as
So-
we discussed last week.
So it'll be back on a workshop for,
No, the decision was made last week to not bring it back on a workshop, just to have it on preliminary this week and to bring it for introduction next week.
so the ordinance that applies to binding interest arbitration, which went to a vote of the citizens, is not going to be discussed publicly at any workshop at any time.
It was discussed last week at the workshop.
Well,
Yeah.
it was. So I have a couple of questions about that, and I'm certainly willing to wait until the introduction. I can do them now. I really don't care, but
No, yeah, we should probably do it.
I'm obviously going to ask them at some point.
I mean, Jen's here, we can entertain questions now. Yeah, it's up to the body.
And just for folks' awareness, I wasn't involved in the closed session.
It wasn't closed, that's why.
oh no, Kristin, we voted against closing.
Okay.
There was no closed session.
It wasn't
yeah, it
how it
wasn't.
was on the agenda.
It was on the agenda and it was voted
Yeah.
not to close the session for that, and it was discussed in open session, so there's no closed discussion was involved.
So exclusive representative pursuant to section 802A of the Charter of the City of Hagerstown, this is on page 1C, where it says it only applies to police department and the fire department. That's how it'll remain.
That's correct, pursuant to the charter amendment.
Okay. And then under section D, mediation, fact-finding and arbitration, the second line from the bottom, upon completion mediation and fact-finding without final agreement on a new collective bargaining agreement, the parties who have declared the impasse shall commence arbitration procedures in accordance with the subsection. Who makes a finding that the impasse has occurred? Because it keeps saying in this document, it continually says the parties that have declared an impasse.
Sure.
Is parties intended to mean both entities?
Yes, it's actually defined in B2. Both parties would agree in writing.
Okay. And then on page 2, at the top, so it goes on this subsection 8, says the existing or most recently terminated or most recently expired collective bargaining agreement between the parties who have declared the impasse shall remain in effect until a final disposition is tendered. So, in the most recent iterations of union deliberations, we have, one of the questions came up, do we let the contracts expire or do we continue them for some, period, which we did. We continued them, I think, for a specific period. Will this new language, as it is written, not allow the contract to expire?
Yes.
So we no longer have the power to allow contracts to expire. That'll be removed as part of this ordinance. We won't have that authority as a body.
Well, I think that would only apply if the parties go down the road of declaring an impasse and initiating the binding arbitration procedure.
So there, I guess my question then is does this remove that step entirely? In other words, right now, without this in existence, we as a body, as the elected body of the city, have the ability to say, we're going to allow the contracts to expire and we're going to start them from anew. We're going to write them back into existence. If I read this right, it says the existing or most recently terminated or most recently expired collective bargaining agreement between the parties who have declared the impasse shall remain in effect until a final disposition is rendered. So what I read that to mean is that we no longer will have the ability to allow contracts to expire, that under this ordinance, they'll have to continue to exist in effect and be carried then through a binding arbitration process.
I think if you get through all of the steps, this would only come into play, one, if an impasse is declared by both parties. Two, they go through the mediation process and there's no resolution. Then they go through the fact-finding process and there's no resolution. And actually proceed to arbitration, then yes, the contract would not be permitted to expire.
Okay. I just want to make sure that everyone here is aware that's a sort of, right as an elected body that you're giving up. And then on page 3, under number 1, alternative arbitrator list, between sections, I, J, and K, up here in I, it says you can agree to accept fewer than 5 arbitrators, right? But then you go to the next section, it says that the union kicks out 1 arbitrator, the city then kicks out 1 arbitrator and then makes the assumption that you have 3 left, right? And that's how I kind of read this.
Yes.
But if you read section I, number 1, it says you can agree to accept fewer than 5 arbitrators. So I'm just curious, as you look through this page, if it says you can agree to start with less than 5, it doesn't say what minimum number. It just makes an assumption 2 sections down that you're going to end up with 3, even though in section I, you're agreeing that you can start with less than 5. If you start with 3 and you kick out, and you still have this kick-out clause of 2, then you're down to 1. And that, I guess that I find that confusing, because if you go to K, the first sentence says, if any of the panel of 3 neutral arbitrators selected under subsection J is unwilling, unable to serve, et cetera. So I just want to make certain that somewhere in here it specifies what number you can go down to. Does accepting fewer than 5 mean 1, 2, 3?
I can certainly clear that up.
Can I speak to that a little bit? I think if you go back to H, which we're talking about arbitration, and we're just, the 5 represents given a list of 5 to start with.
Right,
So you
but,
know what I mean, right? So
but
that
in
if-
I, it says, if you can't get a list of 5 out of this entity that you've identified, you have 2 options. You can start with less than 5. In other words, if they can only give you 4, but then J and K make the assumption.
You're still gonna
that
end
you-
up
that
with
you've
only
gotten
3,
5.
that we're gonna get 3. That's the goal.
How do you do that if the city and the union each strike 1? How do you still get to 3? I mean, I'm reading this and I
Yeah.
can't follow how you get to 3
Well,
going from H to K.
If you look at J4, there's a provision there, if either more than 5 or fewer than 5 are provided, the city essentially gets the final strike. So if,
So you may not
if 4
get
are
any
provided-
strikes,
Right, I think your concern is if it starts off with less than 5 right out of the gate.
and you get down to 2,
Right.
and you don't like either, and neither party gets to strike 1 because you got to get to 3, how do you reconcile that?
So maybe some verbiage of agree to accept fewer or less than 5, but at a minimum of at least 3, something, is that what you're looking for, some sort of specific verbiage so it's a guarantee?
Well, there's got to be a minimum of at least 5 so that each entity gets to strike at least.
Right.
All right, I'm just saying that isn't what this says.
Yeah, we're following you. That's what we're offering solutions to
Yeah,
the
okay.
verbiage.
Okay. Page 4, M41. So, it says that, determinations of neutral arbitrator panel, and then some item 4, some item I. So, the limits on the city's ability, so it says that what they'll do is they'll evaluate and give the highest priority to the ability of the city to pay for additional short-term and long-term expenditures by considering the following factors. One is the limits on the city's ability to raise taxes or charge fees under state law. And I read that sentence, and, you know, every time that we do a bond, what we say is, in effect, we're pledging the full faith and credit of the citizens of Hagerstown. So I read this statement and it says an arbitrator is supposed to consider how much we can raise taxes. Well, that's pretty easy, folks. We can raise taxes to whatever number in the world you want to. And so I don't understand how what we're going to hand a power to an arbitrator to do is say, hey, the number one thing you need to consider in whether or not this arbitration, you know, how it shakes out is whether the city can raise taxes or not, when the city says by its own admission in every bond and every budget we adopt that we have the ability to raise taxes to whatever degree we're required to be able to afford that cost to do so. You've completely handed that to a, what I'll call non-interested parties determination. And it goes on further in subsection 5 under 3 on the next page, where it says it's supposed to take a comparison of the number of public sector police employees or public sector fire employees, both gross and on a per capita basis, to the number of residents of Washington County, Allegheny, and some other jurisdictions. And, you know, there's about 3 areas in here where it talks about that, where it basically says that they're going to make a determination based on what other governmental jurisdictions do. So what you've basically said is arbitrating panel, look at what other jurisdictions do and try and, you know, compare it to them. And I just don't understand how you base, you know, they all have their individual budget, and especially jurisdictions in other states, you know, entire other states that operate on completely different jurisdictional governmental standards. I mean, Pennsylvania, by example, you know, every jurisdiction's its own jurisdiction. So, and I guess the biggest part that, and you know, and I'll just say it flat out, the biggest part that I would oppose this ordinance over is under item number 6. And I think that in my opinion, it's somewhat lunacy that anyone would ever agree to this, citizen, elected official alike, where it says within 30 days of the arbitration hearing or the parties' submission of post-hearing briefs, the panel will issue, meaning the panel of arbitrators that are not elected by you, the citizens, will issue a final written award based solely on the evidence presented at the arbitration hearing that either, and it goes on, chooses between and sustains in its entirety either the total package. In other words, it can't consider or can't bring in things that were outside of the limited number of things that you're availed to bring into the arbitration process here. It also or resolves all the stipulated issues of the final award, meaning that decision doesn't come back ever to this body. That decision is solely the decision of that panel. And the only recourse in that process is under O, where it says revision of the final written award by agreement of the parties, meaning if the parties can work out some mechanism at the end of that mutually, that they would be, that you would be able to go forward and unilaterally do so. But, that sentence, that the panel issues a final written award based solely on the evidence of the arbitration hearing is that's crazy. I mean, that's crazy.
What's binding arbitration, Kristin?
I understand.
I mean, I understand that you're saying you disagree with binding arbitration, but you sort of can't have binding arbitration that one of the parties can reject.
I understand the obviousness of that point.
And I would point out that the one issue you had on the number of arbiters, I mean, number 1 was to agree to accept fewer than 5, but right after that it says or. So there you don't have to accept more than 5. There is an alternative to that.
Right, but if you do accept less than 5, you do get into a conundrum.
Well, it takes both parties to
two
accept less
sections
than 5, so
under
hopefully,
that.
but I mean, I totally understand your frustration. It's nothing new.
Any other comments on the binding arbitration?
I have a nitpicky
ordinance?
question.
Go ahead.
Are you not finished?
I just have one question, but you go
Okay,
ahead.
Good, I'm sorry.
My only question is, have the unions been provided this documentation at this point?
Not provided directly, no.
So the unions haven't been provided this documentation at this point?
Not directly. I'm sure that they've accessed it through the
Okay.
agenda.
I only point that out because I've pointed out previously, the unions clearly indicated, at least to me, and I'm sure to other elected officials at this table, that they clearly wanted to be a participant in the drafting of this legislation. And I have no illusion that once they have the document and have the ability to review it with their respective legal counsel, that any number of elected officials sitting here that are in favor of it are going to hear their concerns and their interest and their input. So I would be hard pressed to believe that we'll actually get to adoption of this ordinance in the time frame that we've committed ourselves to.
Don?
Jen, under the term definition of impasse, under the next to the last line, it says conditions of a proposed new collective bargaining agreement. Isn't the word new in there unnecessary? I mean, if it's proposed, isn't it the newest agreement? I mean, it doesn't seem to make any sense you putting those two words together, proposed new. Well, just think about that if you will. I'm not. I had a teacher in 12th grade, an English teacher, who was really a stickler for those kinds of things. Her name was Miss Seaman.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Mayor.
Yep, done. Thank you, Jen. Anything else on the consent agenda?
There'll be one
Preliminary agenda
added,
review.
one added item, correct? The Maryland Theater grant? Yes. We just found out about, but we
Okay.
don't have any information on that in the packet now, do we?
Kathy, maybe Kathy can.
Kathy, you have any
Just
information
that
on
we're talking about adding the Maryland Theater grant for next week.
Possible state grant was brought to the Maryland Theater's attention by the county through the Department of Agriculture, some rural program. And so they said that they needed to go through a local government, said we're a little bit tapped out right now. So what proposes Maryland Theater will fill out the grant, but we have to be the official requester. And I'm still trying to get more detail from Maryland Theater on how much they're asking for and what part of that grant program they're asking for.
So we may ask to add that to the agenda next week.
Has the same deadline as the ones that we're writing. Must be a magic date for the state.
Thank you. All right, moving on then to Arista Utility billing outsourcing. Mike?
Good evening. We bring you good news.
I saw that, yes.
Absolutely. First, I have to thank Nancy and Nellie for this. They spearheaded this project 100%. The credit goes to them for all the processes they went through to get this far with us in the research and the meetings. For the utilities, we continue to reevaluate what goes on with our processes, looking for cost savings. This is one that we found and recognized, and it's in our billing. As you can see, we can save $8,500 a year by moving to a new process with Arista that'll give us greater functionality. We'll actually sleep better at night knowing that the bills are going out on time. It's all electronic transfer. We can do much more research and much more flexibility with our bill. I think that's been some of our discussions before for adding things onto the bill. We have a much greater latitude in that now to move forward. If you would ever want to add any other fees for recognition on the bill, it can occur rather easily. So we're pleased with being able to move forward. It was bid out through Martinsville, so it went through the competitive process. It's met out all of our parameters that we have.
Great job.
Yes.
Very efficient.
We're good.
Any questions on this from
Yes.
council?
Yep. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, you asked me 1540 labor contract. Scott, you're up there all by yourself, buddy.
It's lonely up here.
It is, man.
At the top.
Bring to you a copy of the tentative agreement with ASME 1540 that was ratified by the union's membership on May 9th. There are 125 active members of the union, 52 in the general fund, 37 water, 33 wastewater, 1 parking fund, and 2 in the golf fund. There were 33 proposals put on the table. Not all of those were agreed to, but a synopsis of what was agreed to, Karen put in the packet before she left. I would like to go over a couple of them. 1540 was the only union remaining that had a Me Too clause as part of the contract. The original language was is in the cover memo. If any employee group, IAFF, IBEW, ASME 3373, the police, or non-union receive a wage scale or benefit enhancement in the new contract, the enhancements will be similar. It could be shared the same way with ASME Local 1540. The intent was to get rid of the Me Too clause completely, and that was our proposal. We came to recognize that during negotiations that to get that removed completely would have been a pretty expensive proposition. So what we tried to do was work with 1540 in a way that we could structure what would be left of a Me Too in the most fair way that would not only continue to protect the interests of 1540, but also provide flexibility to the other groups, including non-union, to be able to get enhancements. What we ended up with as part of a pretty comprehensive package that included several proposals throughout here that was agreed with, was language that states, and I'll go through it, there's 3 paragraphs, and I'll go through each paragraph and try to explain the reasoning behind it. The proposed language is if ASME 3373, IAFF 1605 are non-union employees receiving across the board, meaning all members of the group receiving across the board COLA and/or one-time stipend bonus, it'll be shared equally with members of 1540.
Can I stop you there real quickly?
You can.
Does this sentence really mean having the word "and" in it?
It means
versus
having the
"or"?
word "and" in it instead of "or" in it. That was a typo that was
So
just a
it should be
typo.
"and"?
It should be "and."
So that would mean
If-
that if one of these groups received this, but the other 2 didn't, this
Right.
wouldn't kick in?
That is true.
Okay, so because the reason I ask you that is
It's an important distinction.
we have the police contract already signed, correct? And what unions of police? That's
3373.
Okay, so we already have a contract with them, so for this Me Too clause to kick in, we would have to change Local 3373's contract that we just
No,
agreed to.
we would not, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
Okay.
The first paragraph, the biggest change in the first paragraph is it removes IBEW out of the mix.
Right.
IBEW was removed because not only are they all confined in a separate fund, but their pay scale is so different that it really put them at a disadvantage because of the way their plateaus are and the way their scale is based. So they were removed from the grouping. The second paragraph, if Local 1540 ratifies a contract with a specified across-the-board COLA and/or one-time stipend bonus, and the city chooses to pay another employee group in another manner, the example there is 1540 receives a COLA and others receive a stipend bonus, as long as the 2 increases are relatively equal, 1540 cannot invoke this section. So, the discussion we had there was, we've had issues where there may be cases where we would want to do step increases, and for those that would be at the top of scale already, they might get a stipend, say. What would happen would be if 1540 would have just gotten a COLA or a step increase and no stipend, they would Me Too the stipend and get that also. That can't happen now. Because it's not across the board, it wouldn't be everybody getting the stipend. It would be a mixture of benefits that, taken as a whole, would not count to the Me Too. So that's where that paragraph comes in.
What happens if in settling the issue that we have with IAFF, that we already have an agreement that we're gonna make them whole by 2020, what happens if we do that by way of a stipend or a COLA?
1540 is already has already been made whole. So that wouldn't kick in for that.
Well,
Let
when
me go to
does it
last-
kick
every-
in? I'm confused, because we have.
The only way it would kick in, in the last sentence, this section does not prevent the city from providing steps to any employee group as per their pay scale, as per their wage scale. So, when this would kick in would be if we give 3373 a 2% across the board raise.
And let me stop you right there. We already have a contract signed with 3373.
Right.
So the only way we would do something like that is in 2 years, we have a 5-year contract. 2 years from now, staff comes in and says, we can't hire cops. The only way we can hire cops is to do a COLA, an across-the-board increase. We gotta do something, and suddenly we have a Me Too, unless, again, I wanna ask that first question again, because with the word "and" in here, as I understand it,
It's
not
not
only.
and, it's or.
That
I'm
and is
sorry,
not
that's-
there, it's or.
It's or,
Yeah, I don't- in the
okay.
That and
contract-
is not in there,
That's
or.
right, okay, that's all I wanna make sure.
The contract
Okay.
itself
Okay.
cleared,
Yes.
yes.
So that's a concern of mine, because the one group of employees we have that is really driven by demand and ability to hire is police. And I am not in a position to agree that I'm going to give an employee group a change in their contract to their benefit 3 years into it because I can't hire police officers. I can hire plenty of people in this bargaining unit, but I can't hire police officers, so I have to do something to either retain, okay, maybe it's not hiring, maybe it's retaining. Maybe the only way I can retain my police officers is give them a one-time stipend. And then I'm being told that another bargaining unit that I have no trouble hiring on, I have to give them the exact same, and I won't agree to it. I guarantee you, you'll be paying for it. Because I have some doubts. I think it's a bad move. I think the one thing we have said in here and said in here and said in here is no more Me Too clauses.
And we
And here's our
tried
Me Too
very,
clause.
we tried very hard to completely remove the Me Too clause.
Scott, you have no problem Mike Hanlon coming up to the table
I don't
and
care.
answer a question?
Sure. The one thing I will tell you about, and for that particular example and what we've done with the others, I know for a fact that with the police and what we did with their pay scale and the savings that are generated out of their pay scale, that particular example as far as retention, because that's always been, well, in this contract period, with 3373, that was the major emphasis, it was retention.
Right.
So when we constructed that pay scale with the union, it was with retention in mind, so that situation that you're talking about wouldn't happen. And because, and that last sentence we have here would not prevent the city from providing steps to any employee, that was put in there, should we look at revising pay scales in the same manner that we did with police with the others, because then that would be the active pay scale for that particular bargaining group at the time. And if there were steps to that particular pay scale that would generate a different type of overall increase, 1540 could not Me Too that because of that increase.
So why doesn't the sentence say then, this section shall not apply to the city providing steps to any employee group as per the wage scale? All it says here is this section doesn't prevent the city, but it doesn't say that if the city does it, that it doesn't kick in. It should say this section does not apply to the city for providing steps to any employee group as per their wage scale.
Yeah, that's, you know, I mean.
So, can anybody come up with a scenario that this Me Too clause would kick in, so we understand?
Yeah.
Tell me,
I mean,
please.
binding arbitration. I mean, the reason I thought that IBW frankly was left out of here and IAFF and 3373 are kept in is because they're the only two groups that have the binding arbitration. And
Right.
so we go through a process, and in fact, I won't support this unless there's a sentence added in here that says that if we lose some binding arbitration of 3373 or 1605, that doesn't apply. Because that's completely out of our control as a body. We basically handed the books over to some outside party and said, here,
Yeah, but.
you decide.
But that.
And that can't come back
but-
then
but-
and then apply to all the other
No,
groups.
no, but it wouldn't, because what we're
Well,
dealing.
it doesn't say that here.
No, but the answer to that, Kristin, is very simple. I mean, the binding arbitration issue is an issue on the beginning of a contract, okay? So, we don't go to binding arbitration over a grievance. We don't go to we have a 5-year contract.
Yeah, but 3 years in, you have that reopener process, which will put your contract in an open period, right? As it applies to wages.
Just wait, yeah.
Right.
And we've got some agreement with the IFF that says, you know, if you agree to do something, and I don't know that we're on the same page as what it says, but if you agree to do something by 2020, things are good.
Okay,
Whether
so
that doesn't kick in.
But we have a reopener in wages, and this is what I want to get to. So, Yeah, we have a reopener in wages and on the.
Which this one also
and
has.
on the-
In fact, this one doesn't just say it's a reopener, it actually says that in 2 years, you're going to consider what the wages are gonna be for the remaining 2
Okay,
years.
so
In other
what
words,
we
the other
have
one
is 3 years-
says,
we
the
have
other one
3-year
says,
contracts,
3 years,
not
there's the
2
ability
years.
to reopen. But this one actually says something different. It says, at the end of that 3-year period, you're going to determine what the remaining 2 years are. It doesn't even say at this point what that is.
If I may, when we discussed this, binding arbitration wasn't even discussed. We didn't take that into consideration. That had nothing to do with the way we ended up where we ended up at. We ended up where we were at because, again, we hang on to the Me Too. Again, all 4 unions at one point had this clause, so all of them would be fair across the board and be treated the same. The reason AFSCME 1540's hung on to it for so long, and I know Mr. Aleshire, we've had our talks on this issue before, and guys don't like the way I phrase it, but it's the forgotten bunch. But I don't mean generally by you in general, but if you go and say, we're getting rid of police, we're gonna cut back fire, you'll have the citizens up here protesting immediately. You come after our union, nobody cares. They don't care until the sewer's backed up in their basement, till they can't turn on their lights, till they don't have no running water. Our guys are a day-to-day job, but because it's day-to-day, people just don't. They take it for granted. It's every day. Okay? That's why we wanted to, but we made changes that we all agreed to that would allow the city to work with the other unions. And again, that across the board is the big part of it. It has to be across the board. Police right now, they're doing a lower, they're condensing, they're giving a little to their top, doesn't affect the Me Too clause. Doesn't touch it. Plus, Ms. Means was present at the very last one, what we discussed, and I think it was your idea at one of the meetings. Once this comes into effect, when we're talking COLAs, then all the unions should be brought together and talk about money at the same time.
That's right.
So we're all on the same page. So hence, even though it's there, if we all talk about it at the same time, a COLA's a COLA. The
Right.
cost of bread doesn't go up any different for you than it does for me. So if you get a 3%, why should I get a 1%?
Well,
That's the
that-
whole point.
Right, and that was the whole thing behind that.
But this sentence adds in those other unknowns. Especially if you add the word "or" in. Well,
Well,
and let me just, look. You have the current contract language that basically says, if these other groups get it, we get it. Now you have, instead of actually taking it out, you've doubled the size of this paragraph. And you have narrowed it down, and I appreciate, your statement that the binding arbitration doesn't come into the conversation that you may have had, but it clearly comes into the process as it applies to those third-year period that I believe exist, and this agreement that, we keep citing of fire for these 2 specific groups. And in the last sentence, as I pointed out, this section does not prevent the city from providing steps to any employee group as per their wage scale. Doesn't say that this section doesn't apply to that. It just says that the city can go do it for those other groups.
And again, we didn't, when we discussed it, steps, we understand it. Right now, to make management whole, the city would have to give management 2-step increases a year for the next 3 years. And then the guys at the top, and that have more than 13 years in the city, obviously, they give them nothing, or they're gonna give them 1%. It doesn't stop you from saying, all right, this year, we're gonna give the bottom guys that haven't gotten, we're gonna give them 2 steps, and we can afford a 1% COLA to the guys at the top just to give them something, because they haven't received none. That will not affect the Me Too, because again, it's not across the board. It's a separate issue. You broke it into pieces.
May I make a suggestion? I suggest that before we discuss this any further, we have a very fine labor attorney. And I would suggest that this clause be sent to our labor attorney. Again, please, anybody in this room who disagrees with me because they know that I'm wrong, please say so. But to my knowledge, on the Me Too clause issues in the last 20 years, this council has never won a grievance, ever. We've looked at things and said, that wasn't under the Me Too clause. Oh, yes, it was. So unless I have a labor attorney look at this clause and put in writing something that effectuates what we all want it to effectuate. I understand if you're saying we go ahead and give people a cost of living increase, that you should have one. In the same respect, I don't know. If I look at non-union employees who we're not going to give any step increases to or any of this, and we just say, you know, non-union employees, been 2 years since you got a COLA, we're gonna give you a COLA. Now, you guys get a COLA. And every Me Too clause issue we've ever had, we've lost, every single time. And I can remember sitting in sessions with attorneys going, I don't know how we lost this, it seemed black and white to me. And unless I get that assurance from a labor attorney, I will not vote for a contract with Me Too clause.
Well, Mr. Metzner, I've been here for 15 years with the city, and this is the first time I've known. I've been asking guys that have been here 40 years with the city. They can't even think of when the Me Too clause was initiated before that. What happened with this last Me Too clause, you want to call it the perfect storm? It was. You had a new president, new union rep, new HR director, and things just didn't jive. This contract we went over 4 times. You can ask Scott.
I have no
4
problem with
times
that.
in
I
check
want
once.
our labor attorney to go over it though, so I know from a labor attorney that it says what you guys mean that it says. Because I understand what you're saying. The problem is 3 years from now, 4 years from now, you may not be here, I may not be here, Scott may not be here, be a new president in, and it'll be a new storm. I'm not going to do it.
That was the reason for our final meeting, which is one of the reasons it wasn't presented to you earlier. First off, we hadn't presented to the body and assist on the very final meeting, which we sat down with their group and our group. We went over everything to include this. The notes were not added to this because we were going to exercise it. Those notes are added to the HR file, which covered all these things. And that was the problem we had last time. It was like, this is what this means. So what we did on the very final meeting was all agree that every change, exactly what the wording was and what it stood for. And those notes were taken and left in the file for that purpose. For that purpose, Karen's leaving, I may not be around them, so you can go back to your notes and say, no, this is exactly what we agreed to, and this is what the meaning of each of these were. We were gonna make that very definite. We added a clause in now that adds the city administrator as part of our grievance process, because we don't wanna have to go to arbitration if we don't have to. We didn't have that process before, so we added actually one more step to avoid an arbitration. We don't wanna go to arbitration any more than you guys wanna go to arbitration.
I totally understand. I think we have a grievance against us right now, if I'm correct. And I know you guys don't want to do it, but and I'm not saying I would not agree to it, but I'm saying after all this experience that I've had, I want our labor attorney to look at it. It's just that simple. It's not any, as long as we have the wording right and make sure that it says what we all agree that it says, then I don't have a problem with it. But otherwise, I need to see that. That's just me. And I think, I think Richard Vernon would be an excellent person to look at this.
That's the group we use. Rick and Julie.
And I think that should include clarification as it applies to buying arbitration and mid-contract.
Kristin, that's exactly. I mean, I hear your concerns, I hear the concerns, and I think we get it straight and get it in, and just make sure that the wording for a third party down the road can look at it and say, it means what we all said it means. That's all. I'm not looking to change anything but the true meaning of what you guys want to do.
Okay. We'll get the,
Are we gonna review the rest of it, or are we stopping here, or?
Well, just, yeah, just briefly, there were some wage enhancements that were within the guidelines provided as far as what was budgeted in each year. A 1% cost of living adjustment in January of 18, so it would be a half-year adjustment in FY 18. 1% July 1st, 2018. The wage scale had a 25-year anniversary step added effective in FY 19. The current scale was at 19. A 1% in FY 20, and then as Councilman said, there'd be a wage reopener in FY 21 and 22. The healthcare amendments were agreed to. Holiday, the city did agree to pay 2 times regular rate of pay for all hours worked if it was unscheduled overtime or on call for Thanksgiving Day or Christmas Day only, not any holiday. The rest were what you would consider minor provisions, the one that Mike mentioned on the additional step to the grievance process. Some other stuff that was on there that was federal law changes we had to put into the contract. Let's see, there was one in there that if you were hired after 12/1, you did not get a personal day. A lot of those that were in the past, if you were hired 12/1 or after, you got a day off. That was removed out of the contract. So anybody hired after 12/1 did not get that personal day to use before the end of the year.
I think probably the most important point in this is the one that we're gonna get guidance from our labor council.
We can do that.
Yeah. Okay,
We've become buddies.
thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Community development block grant.
Good evening. Before Michelle begins her general overview of the full CDBG budget, there were two distinct items that we wanted to focus on and seek mayor and council direction. One is a current fiscal year 2017 allocation of our local fund repayment into the CDBG program. In February, the mayor and council had approved a local fund repayment of $46,250 into our CDBG program. That source of funding was from property management. That was a payment to lift restrictions on the Roslyn building space where the parking operation is shifting. We've had numerous discussions in the past with HPD over potentially using CDBG funds for HPD cameras, and Chief Brito is here, he can speak on that. We've spoken with HUD on the CDBG camera project, and it's a bit unique. It's not something that's done frequently, so we had to do a little bit of digging and some research on it. Because of the way it would be categorized in the CDBG program, it would be a public service activity, actually, in our current fiscal year. So we have a very short window of being able to use that funding. I know the camera budget in HPD is in the budget book is roughly $150,000 each year, and $35,000 would be obviously a small portion of that in this current year, but any shot in the arm, I think, it would just help reduce maybe impact on other funds that would maybe be needed for the HPD cameras. So what we are seeking direction on is approval of $35,000 of that funding repayment into the program to be used for HPD cameras, and it would need to be used before the end of this fiscal year. And if Chief wants to talk any more on the camera program or anything like that, he can dive in.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an integral part of our crime-fighting strategy, our cameras. This $35,000 would go to replacing 21 of the cameras which we have now, which are old analog cameras, upgrading them to digital. As we gave a presentation earlier regarding the difference between the analog and the digital cameras, it's night and day for us. It's a very important part of our crime fighting and our strategic plan for public safety and resiliency in the city. So it's a no-brainer for me. Getting those cameras up is very, very important. As we move forward, there's numerous cases which I could point to where we have utilized our cameras to solve crime and to bring people to justice. So it's a huge part of our strategy.
We okay with that?
Yep.
The other remaining portion of that funding would be approximately, I believe, $11,250, which isn't much, but we do have a program each year where we loan funds to homeowners who are in need of home repairs, general home rehabilitation, and we do have funding in the budget in the current fiscal year, and we usually keep that in the budget each year with the CDBG program. But we have roughly 3 to 5, I believe, applications in the pipeline for single-family loans, and that would just once again be a small shot in the arm for that program. Hopefully help some homeowners with needed home repairs as we continue to work through those applications.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The second item before Michelle begins to start the general overview of the CDBG budget for FY18 is the FY18 public service funding allocations. In 2013, we started a citizen review committee that assists in reviewing our CDBG public service funding allocations. The unique part of public service funding in the CDBG program is there is a regulatory cap on that funding each year, so it is highly competitive. One unique part about this funding for FY18 is all of our FY18 public service funding applicants were exactly the same as last year, so we didn't have any new applications. So I think it made the review portion less difficult as compared to past years. What we are projecting, and another thing to make sure everyone is aware of, we are still working on an estimated number for the CDBG budget for FY18 because the federal government has yet to allocate the funding for the CDBG program in their current fiscal year, which impacts our FY18. What we've heard from the most recent update from HUD is that we should have our grant number sometime in June. So this is all still a bit of a moving target, but what we are projecting is our public service funding cap in FY18 to be roughly $105,000. We're hearing that our grant will probably be a similar number to what it was in FY17. So looking at our public service cap calculation for FY18, looking at the rankings, which were included in the packet, we do have them on the screen for the proposed FY18 CDBG public service funding entities. It would actually be level funding, and just a quick overview of those organizations: the Community Free Clinic, Children in Need, Senior Living Alternatives, Girls Incorporated Supper Program, Community Action Council, and Together with Families. Many of these have been funded for many years. The Together with Families and Community Action Council are relatively new, but once again, we wanted to highlight these with the mayor and council. We wanted to thank our review committee for their involvement. It's a way to have transparency built into the public service review process, and we wanted to make sure the mayor and council would be accept the level funding scenario for the FY18 public services.
Yep.
Okay. Michelle?
So, while Jonathan is still here to kind of take advantage, I'm going to go ahead and discuss and review some additional and new topics in the fiscal year 18 budget. And then once we do just a brief highlight and overview of CDBG and Economic Redevelopment Fund, we'll kind of just recap and go over public hearing and where we've left things right now in the general fund. So first and foremost, the CDBG and Economic Redevelopment Fund, both of these funds are considered to be special revenue funds. These funds are still considered a governmental fund similar to the general fund. Just means that unlike the utilities, electric, water, wastewater, CDBG nor Economic Redevelopment can charge services and charge a rate for what they provide. CDBG begins in section 5 on page 3, and we include details like performance indicators, department program objectives, things that are very important, I think, on the narrative side, and especially from maybe Jonathan's perspective in HUD. Then we have more detailed information and spreadsheets. Section 5, page 5 for CDBG, before we get into the details, is a more summarized, high-level look at what is in the CDBG. Includes the revenue sources, and in CDBG, our primary and for the most part, our only revenue sources are our annual federal HUD entitlement money. And then we have some program income, and our program income is mostly the monies that we're receiving paybacks on loans that we currently have. And then on the expenditure side, we break things down into categories like commercial and industrial improvements, clearance and demolition, public facilities and improvement, public services, cost of properties held for resale, housing rehab, and administration. Of those expenditure categories and types, there are 2 within CDBG that have annual or maximum caps that are allowed. It just means that the federal government has come along and said, you know, here we're providing you revenue, but in order to participate in our program, certain expenses are eligible to be reimbursed. So They may give Jonathan a letter tomorrow that says you get $600,000 for your fiscal year 18. That does not mean we actually get $600,000 wired into the City of Hagerstown account. It means Jonathan has $600,000 that's considered entitlement for that specific year. He has goals and plans and priorities and objectives in which he can spend them on. But we have to actually spend the money first and then get reimbursed after the fact. Of the expenditures, then they come down on the public services side, so the items that Jonathan was just mentioning. And if we want to take a look in the budget book, on page 7 of section 5, the same groups that Jonathan has provided that the committee voted is the public services section. And Jonathan, you just want to go over what is our annual amount that we can spend in public services in any given year?
Yes, whatever given fiscal year you're looking at for public services, you look at that given fiscal year's grant amount, and then you add that to the previous fiscal year's program income amount, and then you take 15% of that sum, and that gives you your public service cap. So for FY18, still waiting on our grant number, but we would take that grant number, add it to FY17's program income number, which we still don't know until the end of the fiscal year. But we take 15% of that or project 15% of that, and that's how we come up with our 15% public service cap.
In addition, there are things that we consider administration, where we have staff and services, salaries, wages, benefits, some types of supplies and other
Legal fees.
categories, correct? And those are also on an annual basis that were limited or capped. And what's the cap there, Jonathan?
The cap for administration is that given fiscal year's grant amount added to that given year's projected program income, which makes that cap calculation even more difficult, and it's 20% of that sum.
And so basically what happens is we're getting close. So current fiscal year that we're in is fiscal year 17. We're in March. We're in May. Oh, my heavens, please don't take me back to March. So we're in May, and so one of the things that Jonathan has already had to do with CDBG is meet a compliance deadline, and that deadline was May the 2nd, and so we've reached that goal.
Yes.
And now the second goal is from May 2nd to June 30, if we receive any additional monies, like the $46,250 that he just discussed earlier, it's a program income or monies from additional outside sources, we have to spend that monies by June 30. We need to get it planned, spent, and finished. But in addition to that, in July, once we actually look at closing our books and determine where we are, Jonathan's group, and Jonathan specifically, myself and or someone else in my department will work closely, look at where the administration expenses are, make sure that we're not exceeding our caps. Typically, I would say, historically, we've been closer to limits in the administration area than we have necessarily been on public services, because public services, as Jonathan mentioned, we know at least one of the numbers, it was based on a prior year program income, whereas your administration is all based on current year, so it's a little harder. Examples and details of what is in the administration is on page 8 of section 5. I know one of the things that we've talked about as a group here at the table before, Mr. Mayor, was public facilities and improvements, and specifically handicap ramps. So if we look at the public facilities and improvements, and I'm going to flip you back a page, I apologize, on page 7. The items that are listed under fiscal year 18 proposed budget, the handicap ramps for $80,000, city sidewalk construction for $120,000, and the traffic beacon at Prospect Avenue Crosswalk for $40,000. All three of those projects are city projects, and we have included them in our capital improvement section in section 8, and we are including the funding sources being from CDBG. All of the items under public facilities and improvements are not necessarily city projects. There are times when they're not. When I come back, just backtrack maybe just one step further back to the entitlement revenue. So we're looking at these numbers, and if you go back to page 6, under proposed budget, it looks like total grant awards, we're getting $1 million. I just want to re-emphasize. So what happens is the entitlement is that specific year's money, and Jonathan has to have the plans approved, not just by this group, but also by HUD. And then a good example would be something like Neighborhoods First.
Neighborhood parks, or some of our home ownership properties like 261 South Prospect Street, which was acquired roughly 2 years ago. We have funding in previous fiscal year budgets for the renovations. We've been working through the architectural process for quite some time on that property. But funding is technically in a previous fiscal year's HUD budget for that program. So what happens is the budget book revenues show maybe as 1.2, when actually the grant in the next year may not be part of that. It's coming from the previous budget. So our budget book shows all of our planned expenditures out the door, but some of the revenues may not be reallocated from previous fiscal years. They're still in the budget for those older items that have just taken multiple fiscal years to finalize.
So we did add a chart at the bottom of page 6, and we added this chart a few years ago because about around fiscal year 9 or 10, we were getting close to $1 million on an annual basis. And since that time, you can see that our entitlements have slowly declined down to $654,941 in our current fiscal year 17. And our anticipation for fiscal year 18, we didn't have too much hope originally. We were hearing about all these reductions, and we still don't have a firm number or a commitment. And waiting until June in order to find out could cause some delays on some of
Yeah,
moving
to
forward
reiterate,
with some of these
as Michelle had said, I think from the period of the early 2000s to around 2010, we were receiving roughly $900,000 to $1 million a year. Dropped off sharply in 2011, 2012. We have stayed somewhat level over the last 4 to 5 years, which this year there was so many unknowns during the budget process, and having these numbers put in, the 575 was a conservative estimate. What we are hearing is it probably will be closer to what our entitlement was in FY17. So I think that number may go back up once we hear the final number in June.
That pretty much is our community development block grant fund. It's an entirely separate fund. We account for it differently. From a cash perspective, you asked Jonathan, how much cash is in the CDBG fund right now? Most of the days it's going to be a negative number. Why is it negative? Again, because we have paid for those expenses and then get reimbursed later. Next, does anybody have any questions on CDBG or Community Development Block Grant Fund?
Where did, maybe I missed it, where did the other 4 entitlements come? B, 13, 14, 15, 16?
Okay, so let's go back to that just one quick second. So B17, and so what happens with,
17 is what you just described, correct?
well, so B17 is basically the federal government's fiscal year 17, it's our fiscal year 18. And so 16 was our 17 entitlement, 15 was our 16 entitlement, 14 was our 15 entitlement, 13 was our 14 entitlement. So that B13 entitlement number that you see, there's actual dollars reflected in fiscal year 16. That was our award and our entitlement for fiscal year 14. It did not all get spent and finalized until fiscal year 16. We spent the last remaining amounts. But the grand total that we got in that year for entitlement purposes at the bottom, fiscal year 14, was $666,490.
I'm good, thank you.
You're welcome. And it gets very confusing because it crossed multiple years, and that's why we added the chart at the bottom.
Yeah, they've also changed some accounting processes in the last 2 years, where now we're starting to see, because of their accounting requirements and their drawdown requirements, some of the older grants still have funding in them. It used to be oldest grant would be the first monies that would come into the city when we would do a drawdown, and now that's changed. And sometimes also what can offset and make those older grants a little bit more stagnant than we like is unanticipated program income. Because once again, if we did not anticipate program income, we're required to actually utilize the program income on hand first before drawing down that older grant funding. Sorry.
That's okay. Program income is in that very next section. So sometimes it's early payoff of loans. Very occasionally it's the situation that we have right now where we actually have to repay $46,000. And actually we're doing that because we want to be able to own that portion of the building and utilize it for general government use.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It gets confusing because their fiscal year isn't ours, and then they insist that we go by this B13, 14, 15, 16. confuses us most days.
And one other thing, just to note, there are a few organizations in the housing rehab section. They're not restricted to any caps. There are four, I believe, 3 or 4, Habitat for Humanity, Commission on Aging, and H&DP. So it's 3 that are actually external organizations that receive funding through our housing rehab section.
So now we'll switch gears and we'll look at the Economic Redevelopment Fund. And I think what I will do for the Economic Redevelopment Fund is I just want to stop for a moment and look at 2 of our buildings, 2 of the properties that we own underneath this fund. So in our budget book on page 11, we've listed 2 of those properties for you. One that we own underneath this fund is 170 West Washington Street. And so what we did was included a chart that shows the fiscal year that we've spent monies and the actual funding sources for those, and then the total spend. So for 170 West Washington Street, you can see that our total acquisition cost was $28,140. Right below that, you can see since fiscal year 13, when we acquired that, between demolition and some construction and rehab work that we have done there, the city has spent $347,561 for that. The funding sources below, other than the community legacy grant money, which is from the state, are all local city funding and city monies that has been put into that building. 4353 West Washington Street, again, we do have a contract pending, and we're looking at settlement
End of July.
later this summer. But important because as of the point we're printing this budget book, we still own the property, and unlike some of these other things that are contained in the budget, you're not going to see a separate detail sheet. So we tried to find a different way to include some detail and provide some information. About the same time period, fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 14, you see for acquisition, we acquired the building for $320,000. Since we've owned it, we have put in approximately, or expect to, by the time we get finished in fiscal year 18, $456,000. We had a variety of funding sources, and one of the funding sources, a little different for this building than the prior building that we just discussed, is that we have utilized some CDBG monies, federal HUD monies, for the acquisition and some for some construction. And so what that will do is at the point that we sell this building, we will have to look at the ratio and look at the funding sources and how much CDBG contributed toward this project versus all other sources. Some